We've all heard the Lord's Prayer, right? It's got to be one of the most familiar texts on the planet. But what if hidden inside those lines we know so well is something totally radical, something that completely reframes our relationship with God? In this explainer, we're going to dig into that. We'll see how this prayer isn't just a list of things to ask for, but actually a powerful declaration of dependence.
So here's the puzzle that really kicks this whole thing off. What if I told you that the most famous prayer in the world contains a word that is a complete mystery? Like a word so rare that when Jesus used it to teach us how to pray, it was the only time it ever appeared in all of ancient Greek literature. I mean, how wild is that? It's a fantastic question, and honestly, it's just the tip of the iceberg for our deep dive today.
A lot of people see the second half of the prayer as this shift, right? We go from talking about God to talking about us and what we need. But that's not really the whole story. It's not just about asking for stuff. On a much deeper level, what this prayer is really doing is giving us a chance to say, hey, I'm completely dependent on God for everything, our physical well-being, our spiritual needs, our protection, the whole shebang.
Okay, so let's jump right in with that super famous line, "Give us this day our daily bread." The whole mystery really starts with just one little word in there, daily.
So the original Greek word that we translate as daily is epiousia. And here's where it gets really weird. It's what scholars call a hapax legomenon. That's just a fancy way of saying it's a complete one-off. It appears absolutely nowhere else in all of ancient Greek literature. I mean, think about that. Scholars have looked through everything, every text they can find, and this is the only place this word shows up. So the big question is, why on earth would Jesus use a word that nobody knew?
Okay, so even if the exact meaning of daily is a bit of a puzzle, the word bread is way more straightforward. You have to remember, in an ancient agrarian culture, life was very much day-to-day. So bread here isn't just about a loaf of sourdough. It's what's called a metonymy. Basically, it's one part that stands for the whole thing. It means all our basic physical needs, food, clothes, a roof over our heads. So this is a prayer for provision, not for a new Mercedes-Benz. I love how one pastor put it. It's about our needs, not our greed.
And this, honestly, brings us to a really tough idea, especially for us today. I mean, do we really feel like we need to pray for our daily needs? It's so easy for us to think, well, my job provides for me, or my savings account is my security. But this prayer pushes back on that. It tells us that kind of security, it's just an illusion. Having money can trick us into feeling totally self-sufficient, but this prayer is a constant reminder that, nope, every single day, we're dependent on God to provide.
Okay, let's keep going because this next part really builds on that idea of dependence. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. Wow, this line can be a real stumbling block for people, right? It seems to say that God's forgiveness depends on our forgiveness. So what's going on here? How does that actually work?
Well, the key here is understanding that there are two different types of forgiveness at play. First, you've got what you could call salvation forgiveness. Theologians see this as the big one-time event that starts your relationship with God in the first place. The prayer is not saying your salvation is on the line every time you have a hard time forgiving someone. Few. Instead, it's talking about relational forgiveness. Think of it like ongoing maintenance that keeps your day-to-day relationship with God healthy and strong.
And this just illustrates the problem so perfectly. When we hold on to unforgiveness, when we refuse to let it go, we're not just hurting our relationship with that other person, we're actually building a wall between us and God. The Bible even points to this in other places, like in 1 Peter chapter 3, where it warns that how a husband treats his wife can actually get in the way of his prayers. So the stubborn, persistent unforgiveness, it becomes a roadblock in our spiritual life.
Okay, but let's be real. Forgiveness is incredibly hard. So how do you actually do it, practically speaking? There's a writer, Jerry Sitzer, who went through something just unimaginable, and he has some amazing advice. He says, look, forgiveness isn't a light switch you just flip. It's a process, a journey. And step one is to just pray for the desire to forgive. You're not there yet. You just ask God to help you want to be there someday. Then you actually start praying for that person, even if you don't mean it yet. And his point is, one day you'll be praying that prayer and suddenly realize you actually mean it. It's a powerful idea.
All right, we've made it to the final petition. And honestly, this one might be the most confusing of them all. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Let's just break down why this one trips so many people up.
Okay, so there are basically three big problems here. Problem number one, the Bible is super clear in the book of James that God doesn't tempt us. So why are we asking him not to do something he's already said he won't do? It feels a little weird, right? Problem two, The Bible also says God does test us and that trials are actually good for us. They build character. So why would we pray to avoid them? And finally, problem 3. When it says deliver us from evil, does that mean evil in general, like a concept, or does it mean the evil one, as in Satan himself?
So how do we solve this puzzle? Well, the answer might actually be in a figure of speech, something called litos. Now stick with me here, it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's when you say something powerfully positive by saying the opposite of the negative. We do this all the time without even thinking about it. Like if someone asks how dinner was and you say, not bad. What do you really mean? You mean it was really good. You're using not bad to make a stronger, positive point. And this little literary trick is the key to unlocking this whole part of the prayer.
So if we apply that idea, that concept of litos, to the prayer, it totally transforms the meaning. Lead us not into temptation suddenly isn't this weird, confusing request. It's actually a powerful, poetic way of yelling the exact opposite. God, powerfully deliver us from the evil one. See how that works? The focus isn't on the negative part, don't lead us. It's an urgent, positive plea for protection.
So yeah, the phrasing is a little tricky and poetic, but the main point here is actually crystal clear. What we're doing in this last line is admitting something huge. We're admitting that when it comes to spiritual warfare, when it comes to evil and the kind of temptation that can destroy us, we can't do it on our own. We're just not strong enough. We are completely 100% dependent on God for our spiritual protection, period.
So when you step back and look at the whole thing, our need for daily provision, our need for ongoing forgiveness, our desperate need for spiritual protection, you start to see it. The Lord's Prayer is so much more than just a wish list. It's this deep, profound declaration of our total dependence on God. And that leaves us with a really important question, doesn't it? If we see the prayer this way, how does that change everything about what it means to actually pray it?